All right, everyone. Welcome back. Did we have a good day?
Welcome back.
What a day it was.
What a day.
What a day. I mean, I feel like y'all had a good time, right? It had to have been incredible because, well, I don't know about you, but I could only be in so many places at once. But the sessions that I sat through, the ones that I attended, they were packed, and so many of you were asking great questions and networking afterwards, hanging out with the speakers. And if that's not a proof of a great conference, I don't know what is. So yeah, it was great.
Woo! But you know, it's not quite over yet.
It's not.
We have one more session left.
One more session, a closing session, actually a closing panel. And to make this panel even better, if it could get even better, we are shining the spotlight on all of you, the Iceberg community.
Just as it should be.
Yeah.
We're going to hear from a number of Apache PMC members, committers, contributors, and how they envision the future of the project. With that, I'd like to welcome on the stage with me the panel moderator, JB Onofré.
Woo.
All right, go hug.
All right. Hey, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Danica. Thanks, Kevin. So last session, but I think maybe one of the most interesting because it gave you an overview about what the community is thinking about the future of Iceberg. So I guess you got pretty good details during the breakout sessions. And this morning during keynote, Ryan shared already what is in V3 and what's beyond. And here we know also that you are pretty excited by the future of Iceberg, beyond V3 and V4, more generally speaking. So it's my pleasure to invite on stage for this session, Bill, Sung, Jack, Russell, and Ryan. All right, thank you guys for joining. So let's introduce yourself first. Bill, can you start, please?
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here at the Iceberg Summit. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bill Zhang. I'm with Cloudera, product management responsible for Lakehouse, all things Iceberg, product strategy, roadmap, and innovation. So great to see everyone here. Thank you.
Sung?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sung. I'm a team lead at Bloomberg, managing a team called Trino and Iceberg that utilizes a lot of open source tools like Kubernetes, Trino, and importantly, Apache Iceberg to manage a data platform that many different teams use within Bloomberg. Outside of my day job, I'm also an Apache Iceberg committer, where PyIceberg has been the project that I've been mostly involved in.
All right, thank you. Jack?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jack. This is, I guess, the 5th year of me working with Apache Iceberg, and I'm an Iceberg PMC member. For people who wonder why there's Amazon tag below me for the speaker but not on the panel discussion, it's because I just finished the amazing journey with Amazon for working with Iceberg, and I'm moving to LansDB to explore AI integration for Iceberg and Lens.
All right, Russ?
I'm Russell Spitzer. I'm an engineer at Snowflake, and I'm also an Apache Iceberg PMC member and a PPMC member of Apache Polaris, and I've done a whole lot of open source work over my career, and that's about it for me.
So you started with A, you're closing with A, Ryan.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm a reluctant database engineer. Been working in open source for a few years, and I'm also on the Iceberg PMC.
All right, so let's get started. So we saw this morning during your session, Ryan, a lot of cool features in V3, like we talked about variant, row lineage, default values. I think you didn't mention default values.
I didn't, but I should have.
Anyway, you started to answer the question this morning about what is beyond V3. What can we imagine for V4? I think it's a good opportunity for this panel to share more detail about what you are thinking for the future of Iceberg Spec. So who wants to start? Ryan, you want to start again?
Absolutely. I really am bullish on this idea of single file commits, more adaptive metadata, and really taking the next step in the representation. I really think that our ambition as Databricks is to have a format that coalesces out of the two dominant ones today. And in order to do that, I don't think that Databricks can just say, hey, you should do this. We need to have a situation in which it's a step forward for both the Delta community and a step forward for the Iceberg community. That's the way we can lead the way to a converged and single unified format. So I'm at least looking for those opportunities on both sides to say, like, what is next? What are we building next? And I think the metadata that I outlined this morning is a significant step towards that.
Okay, Russ?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all on board for changes in the metadata layer. I think we've definitely hit a bunch of things that make it really difficult to do really fast commits and other things around that. I'm also really interested in the future of other projects that are related to the Iceberg community. So I think a lot about really wide tables as something I'm always concerned about. And I know me and Ryan have had a lot of discussions about this, and I'm not sure if it's a table level problem or a file level problem, but I think it's something we need to start approaching as we move forward with Parquet as a project and really figure out how are we going to support these tables that are now representing these feature sets that have tens of thousands of columns or something like that. Because this is a very real use case that has come out, and I don't think I see a day go by where someone doesn't ask me, how can I efficiently update a single column in my Iceberg table, which currently, because of how we store our data, is basically impossible. So yeah, I'm interested in that.
Sung?
Yeah, I think it's very early to make predictions on what table spec v4 is going to have, because we're still in the process of implementing the changes for spec v3. But if I had to mention something that I'm very excited about, it's the conversations around policy enforcement. So with the introduction of the REST spec, the way the REST catalog servers are implemented, and with the current state of table spec, right, we're able to now have authorization applied at the table level. But there are now stricter regulation requirements that really mandate that only people who are allowed to have access to certain data, even if it's in the same table, should gain access to that. And it's a really tough problem to solve. So even though we've talked about how dreading it is to explore the idea of having columnar encryption, I think there is still a value in exploring solutions there to make sure that we can have lower level of granularity of policy enforcement supported, whether that be columnar level or role-wise level, so that only people who should have access to certain data can have access to that. And Iceberg Catalog being the center of the data community right now, I think is a good place for us to explore the solutions. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So looking beyond V3, one of the features that I was looking forward to is the multi-statement, multi-transaction at the single unit work, right? So my heritage is Hive, and in Hive asset table, we do support those type of multi-table, multi-transaction single unit work. So this is something that I think will be very helpful for a lot of customers who want to move from legacy Hive table into Iceberg table to support those type of use cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jack?
And for me, I think the thing that interests me most is also what Ryan showed in the morning about the new metadata structure, because as of today, most people who are using Iceberg is still having 4 hops for reading the actual data, the initial catalog inquiry, and then the metadata file in JSON, and then the manifest list and the manifest. Although we introduced the REST catalog, which is combining the first two, but I think most of the implementations today are still internally in the catalog doing the two reads. So, and this new proposal is really solving the problem at the root cause level. And for me personally, I'm enthusiastic with data structures. I see lots of possibility to do very interesting data structures with this proposal. For example, doing a B tree or any self-balancing data structure would be very interesting to explore in those things. And another thing I think is interesting is the relative path, because it is a very important feature for things like disaster recovery or portability about a table across different storage systems. And it has been a feature that has been proposed in the community for so long. Since I think I joined Iceberg, I saw a proposal, and then it has been discussed multiple times. There are also alternative solutions like using a file, and I think it is a great chance that we actually fix the root cause and have this done in V4.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it brings, I think, another discussion regarding what Ryan shared this morning. And I remember a lot of discussion on V3. It was how we can be backward compatible. I mean, when we introduce new metadata, simple example is the source ID, source IDs for multi-arc transform, and how it can impact readers or writers from previous version. How do you anticipate some kind of, how we can guarantee backward compatibility in V4 with V3, or do you think the community will be ready to accept some kind of breaking changes? What's your take on that?
Well, I think from its core, that's the whole, one of our big points about our table versioning is that's where we are saying we're going to possibly break something. And I think as a project, we basically have the mantra that we should always try to accept whatever we can as input, but always rewrite to whatever we believe is the correct standard. So I think when we do this, we're going to have to be very careful about saying this is what we expect writers to produce, but be careful in our libraries to make sure that we're always reading a wider spectrum of what could possibly be produced by clients to ease that transition. But it's going to probably be more difficult than the change from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3.
I agree with that. One of the things that we need to do, though, is figure out how to sunset things that we, to keep the spec just small. We need to remove things from it. And that's really, really hard to do when you have, oh, you guys are smiling at me because I'm thinking of orc.
We can think about equality deletes instead.
We can think of equality deletes. Like, we have made mistakes in the format, and one of the things we need to do is figure out how to gracefully get to the point where people are no longer using those things, whether that is turnover or data age, that sort of thing. But those are definitely some challenges. Right now, I don't think that there's any intention to make V4 not backward compatible. We've always made backward compatibility a guarantee in the previous versions, and I don't think that we would change that. Although I think we might start seeing things like, we did in V3. They're no longer allowed, you are no longer allowed to write V2 position deletes in a V3 table. And I think that that was the right call to keep people moving forward.
Yeah. To add on what Brian just said, that we were just talking about some of the data file support, because today we have Parquet, Evero, ORC file format, and we do see some of the, I guess, from a feature level, now there's some inequality between the data files to support Iceberg table. So want to see moving forward in V3 and also V4, what we're going to do with those incompatibility or those feature level for the data file. So this is something that we need to actually start thinking about as moving from V3 to V4.
Yeah, and I think for, in addition to the file format, I think there's quite a few features in the current Iceberg spec that are not widely supported across different engines or different vendors. I think another good example is equality delete, that we should probably spend some more time in the community to discuss how can we differentiate, for example, one engine says I support V3, but I don't support equality delete. So maybe we can spend some time to have some notions of those terms.
Okay. Sung, any comment on that?
No, fully in agreement that when you're maintaining an open source project and you have a variety of users, you need to understand when is a good time to be able to make backward compatible changes. And I do think a spec upgrades are a perfect time to actually consolidate those changes and make that proposal to deprecate features for the community.
Yeah, that makes sense. You talk about table spec, you talk about REST spec. I wonder about the other specs like view spec, UDF, and all the stuff. Do you have some ideas about what can come in these areas in Iceberg? Who want to start? Sung, maybe?
Why don't you go ahead? Yeah, go ahead.
I can talk a little bit about ViewSpec. So I know it's pretty new to the community. It was just introduced last year, but I've seen how much it really meant to the data engineers within our ecosystem, because I've seen a lot of people maintaining their JDBC-based Metastore database tables and just jumping on to add that extra column for the table type to introduce the views. And I think that's a very telling sign of how much value it is to the analysts, because prior to the introduction of the ViewSpec, you had to rely on an external system to define views, whether that be Hive Metastore or a business intelligence tool of your choice. So being able to actually bring that definition of view into an Iceberg catalog, which is now becoming the center of all of your table definitions, is a huge value to the community. But that being said, that's where we're at now with the ViewSpec, but looking forward, I think there are still areas of improvement. Yeah. Because the way you define the views right now, you basically have to define the view in a specific dialect you're using. So if you're a Trino user, you go type in create view on your Iceberg catalog, it will just define it against that Trino dialect. And it'll be the data owner's work and responsibility to now translate that dialect to a different compute engine that they will also use the views on within their ecosystem. That might be okay if you're just juggling between two different compute engines, but once you introduce a new compute engine that you deemed as worthy to bring into your ecosystem, now you have to go through the effort of defining it again and making sure that the definition of view is consistent across the other compute engine. So portability is definitely an issue, and I think we can maybe look for opportunities to improve there.
All right. Bill?
Yeah, just a quick comment on the materialized view, right? So I would say materialized view is still the industry best practice if we want to improve query performance in orders of magnitude. And I believe the materialized view as spec hasn't been fully finalized, but we do see that as actually will be transformational for the industry, standardized on materialized view, and all compute engines able to consume that materialized view. So that would be a game changer for the industry.
Yeah, Jack?
I actually want to talk about the UDF spec that is ongoing in the community. And I think that has a very strong use case for the row-level access control that is going on in the REST catalog. I was just chatting with Ryan the other day that originally I put up a proposal about using Vue to enforce row-level security, which is if you access a table and the table has any row-level security configuration, then you actually return to the user like a view. But that has quite a few problems with caching on the engine side, because the engine doesn't know if it's always a view, if it's always a table, or if sometimes a view, sometimes a table. However, on the UDF approach, it actually totally solves the problem, because if the row-level security is expressed as some kind of decisions in the low table response, the table will always be a table, but it will be also telling the engine that actually please apply this filter which reference another UDF, that is Iceberg UDF, and the UDF can have complicated SQL syntaxes, expressions to describe like in-clause or any kind of compliance-related expressions. And I think that is actually a much better approach that we should discuss further in the community to push for a governance feature integration in Iceberg REST catalog spec.
All right, Russ?
I think, we've talked about a lot of great things. I think I'll move to another topic then. I think the REST spec, I think, has a lot lot of room.
That's my next question, so you're good.
It's another spec that I think is going to have a lot of changes. I know there's proposals out of Amazon about basically adding more different commit APIs and other things into the REST spec, and I do think that's the right direction to go for a lot of this, because currently the way we do validation and things like that ends up still being very client specific, and that makes me uncomfortable from a versioning perspective, and I'd really like to be able to put more and more weight behind something that a central admin can upgrade and maintain, rather than relying on that admin to upgrade every single person. I was just in the talk from Walla, where they're able to handle this with a huge orchestration layer, which is able to control what every client is using. But I think a lot of orgs are not in that same situation where you can actually stop your clients from using a specific version of Iceberg. So I want things in the catalog.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Any comment, Ryan, about the view spec or things that you can anticipate about?
I've been so, focused on the table spec again.
Okay, which is good.
Probably not.
So back to your point, Russ, about the REST spec and what we see. I mean, we saw this morning during your keynote, Ryan, again, it's a hot topic in the community. I mean, we see a lot of cool feature in REST, like server-side scanning and all this stuff. I wonder what's your standpoint about the ecosystem around the REST spec and the REST implementation, because Iceberg provides the client, but it doesn't provide an implementation. And I wonder what's your standpoint about the relationship between the communities, and the ecosystem, generally speaking?
I mean, in general, I'm really excited because I think for the first time, ever, we have multiple Apache-backed Iceberg REST catalogs. I mean, who could have even thought that would have been a thing 2 years ago, that we would have multiple, not even outside of Apache, but supporting that. But we also have outside of that community other projects that are open source implementations of the Iceberg REST spec. And I think the most important thing is that as we move forward, all of those communities need to get together whenever changes are being made to the Iceberg REST spec to make sure that we're all operating on the same playing field, that we remain intercompatible with one another, and that everyone's able to choose without having to kind of give up their catalog maintenance to a single company. I want to make sure we're in that situation where, just like the Iceberg format, you can take what you have and move it somewhere else if you find that to be useful for your use case.
Yeah, I agree with that. Maintaining compatibility with clients, with all the services, that's going to be a real challenge. But it's super important because I don't think that the problem of a catalog and running a catalog is really something that can be solved the way we did it for tables. We need the portability and to be able to plug in different things, but that really just means that API shell that you can customize inside. That's right. I think maintaining that compatibility and committing to making those central changes to the REST spec and agreeing on it as a community is truly important.
So?
Yeah, I just want to highlight maybe on the flip side, also the importance of creating standards within the Iceberg clients that are actually talking to the REST spec as well. So REST spec is an amazing standard for how the server should be running, what endpoints it should be exposing to support the REST protocol. But until very recently, the auth strategy for REST catalog was a little bit behind, I would say. And thanks to the auth manager API implementation that Alex Dutra actually shepherded, we now have a much more improved way of handling authentication that's introduced in the Java library. And just to sort of explain the importance of that, now because we have an extensible interface through which you can actually bring in your own implementation of the authentication handler, you're now able to just drop in, even if you have a custom authentication mechanism like that you might have within your company that doesn't really follow a public standard like OAuth 2, you can just do that without having to go through the trouble of actually forking the code base and putting that implementation yourself. And I think that's a game changer, and that's a standard we should be following when we're introducing new feature integrations into the REST spec.
That's nice. Jack, any comment on that?
Yeah, regarding the REST catalog implementations, I actually have tried quite a few open source projects. I mean, I'm personally involved in the development of Polaris, and in the talk I did in the afternoon, I was actually using Gravitino IRC server to test my own implementation. I just shoved in my catalog implementation behind the scene Gravitino IRC server, and that gets running. So it feels like there can be different use cases for different kind of IRC server implementations. And I agree with what Russell and Ryan was saying, that It is very important for all the IRC server implementers to get together and get consensus, and we push forward with this standard so that it can become a widespread standard that engines integrate with.
Yeah, Bill?
I think from an Iceberg perspective, there are three things that we're seeing, right? Performance, scalability, and interoperability.
Yeah.
Then where REST catalog comes in is really talking about interoperability. And remember, Jack, last year you did we had a meetup. One of the key things that you talk about extending REST catalog to support Hive table at some of the project that you started at Amazon, right? So I don't know whether this is something that will be going forward, because we do see that data interoperability is very important, and there's still a large community out there still using Hive table. So this is something that will be very interesting to see, that if we can extend the Hive support within the REST catalog as well.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I forgot to mention. Yeah, because I think we have achieved the first step, which is having the table planning APIs that can solve the read side of the problem of reading kind of non-Iceberg formats through the Iceberg REST catalog protocol. And there are still work going on to finalize the read side, also the write side, and also the transaction side. I think there has been increasing consensus across quite a few people that we might need maybe a begin transaction API, or maybe we need to, how do we track transaction for multi-table, multi-statement across all the REST API invocations. Yep. So those are really things I look forward to discuss further with the community going forward.
Totally.
Yeah. Bill, you mentioned a proposal about data file APIs that is currently discussed. And every time that we open this kind of APIs, potentially we may have some kind of deviation about the behavior, and so different user experience. That's always the main challenge. What do you think that, for this panel, do you think that Iceberg should be more opinionated in terms of what should be supported to guarantee a kind of behavior for the users, or be more like focusing on interoperability with a risk that potentially the user experience may be different? Yeah,
great question. Well, I think that just my own personal opinion, as an open source project, we need to have a broader support. So this data file API actually does provide that high level abstraction, so that maybe today is Parquet file is the most popular file format, and tomorrow maybe some other file format comes in. So we can just swap in, but you have a higher level API to support this. Keeping that more open, I think, is always a good thing for the community.
Okay. Any comment on that from the other panelists?
I look at it purely from a how much work do I have to do in the future perspective, which means I am more than welcome to have the next Parquet, the next awesome file format, whatever it happens to be supported in Iceberg. But I want to make sure that when we do that, we have a really good, solid backing of developers who want to help out and contribute to it, because we don't want to be in a position where we're supporting file formats that we don't have anyone to actually work on. So I have that mixed feelings. I do think as a project we should be opinionated, but not so much so that we stop any new thing from coming in. Just know that when we take new things in, that is a burden that the project is taking on, and we need to make sure someone's ready to step up. So.
All right. Well, and it's also not just the project. It is all of the implementations out there in commercial vendor databases and other things. So I think we need to be very careful about mandating requirements for all of those. We've been, I think, pretty disciplined about this in the past, and I think that's one of the secrets to continuing success. That said, we absolutely have to evolve with what's out there. So I'm really excited about Peter's work in the community to introduce that file API, be able to basically build up testing to know when a format is actually meeting the requirements of the spec, and use that as a gatekeeper, right? So if you can pass all of the validation tests, then great. Maybe the next major revision of the format will include that. But then that's a decision that's balanced with, how many people are we asking to go implement a native version in their engine. And that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
So you see something similar to what we did on the REST part with a TCK to validate behave, the minimal requirement to be approved like an Iceberg clean REST implementation.
Yeah,
so we can imagine the same for the data file.
Exactly, and it makes it easier to maintain the formats that we already have, easier to spot problems with the compatibility between, say, ORC and default values or something like that, and also to test formats. But I think it's just hard enough that people aren't going to do it to insist that they need JSON or CSV underneath their tables.
Yeah. Jack?
I mean, personally speaking, I'm very excited about the data file feature that Peter very put up. And to the extent that I actually came to know Lance through that PR, to the extent that I joined Lance TV after that. I think with initial adopters like Lance and Vortex, it has proven that there has been use cases in very specialized domains like ML, AI that can be served with different file formats. And as long as we, similar to, as you said, JB, the TCK is done right, I think I'm pretty optimistic that we can create something that is make Iceberg more oriented for different specialized use cases. And I'm looking forward to the next step on these PRs.
That's nice. Sung?
Yeah, I think like design patterns like the data files API proposal, which really focuses on introducing a standardized interface, right, is just a good decision from a design perspective, because as long as what you're saying is, as long as you're implementing this interface, whatever file format it is that you're choosing to integrate with Iceberg, as long as it's able to fulfill these functionalities, it works. And I think that's a really good practice in terms of really allowing Iceberg to remain a truly language agnostic spec as well as a format agnostic spec, but also in terms of being able to be rather neutral when we're having to make decisions about whether or not a specific file format can be supported and continue to be supported by the community. Because now you have these objective criteria to actually point at and say no.
Yeah, nice. Let's talk about Iceberg languages. I mean, we have different languages now in Iceberg. We have Java, obviously, but we also have Rust, Go, Python. I think today it's not exactly the same kind of expectation on each language. I mean, comparing what is Iceberg, Rust, and Go and Python is way different. Do you think that in the future we will see some kind of same kind of semantic or behavior on each language supported by Iceberg? Meaning the same user experience in Iceberg Python that I can have in Iceberg Java. What, do you think it's something that is the ultimate goal, or is it something more depending on the languages?
I would be surprised. I mean, I am basing this on coming from the Avro community, where we had lockstep releases, all with the same release version for different things, and I found myself as release manager trying to go fix a bug because the PHP interpreter we were using was no longer supported. And so we had to update the build to use a newer version of PHP to get a Java version out. And I definitely want to avoid those issues. So I think it's important that they're separate projects with their own versioning and can grow to meet the needs of the user bases that they are serving. And I think that is really the answer. It's going to be that Python grows to meet the needs of the Python community, and that will almost certainly be different than what the Java implementation is doing to be able to plug into Trino and Spark and Flink and other things.
Yeah, Sung?
Yeah, so I worked mostly on the PyIceberg project, so I have a lot of opinions about those. I do think that multi-language support is incredibly important for the community to make sure that we are making the technology available to a wide range of user base. And let me pull up a receipt, actually. So PyIceberg project, as of yesterday, had 205,000 daily downloads, which is a jump up from 60,000 downloads in June of last year, which is more than 3 times the amount of daily downloads within just a 10-month period. And I think that's a really telling sign that there is a huge demand for native Python support within the Iceberg community. But having worked on the PyIceberg project for some time, I'm fully aware of the challenges that we have in trying to reach feature parity, although that is really the expectation of the community, right? Because different languages are well suited for different tasks. Python, by and large, is still dominating the data engineering landscape because it is so easy to use. It is very fast to develop. But all of the other language implementations we have just boast better performance because they're compiled languages and they have better concurrency support, which is super important for processing big data. So I think it's important to understand how to marry the two. Yeah. A choice we've made recently that Foka talked about in his talk this afternoon is to introduce the Rust-based Python bindings from Iceberg Rust project, where we're really pushing down more of the compute-heavy workloads into the Rust layer and making that available within the Python ecosystem. And we're just barely scratching the surface. We've only exposed the error transformations to fill in a feature gap, just like you were hinting at. But we have a lot more work that we can invest in to make more features available within the Python ecosystem.
Yeah. Russ, any comment on languages?
Man. I think it's been all said already. I mean, it's really about what people want to do with those languages that will drive what kind of features are covered. I mean, so a good example I think would be looking at the Java implementation that we have right now. It isn't exactly the easiest to use if you aren't coupling it with an engine. While the Python engine out of the box had that in mind as a goal. So even if we're saying feature parity, I would say the Java implementation isn't up to snuff in some ways that the Python implementation is. And I think that's just a natural consequence of all of us who are working on the Java implementation are how's this going to work in Spark? How's this will work in Trino? How will this work in Flink? And we don't think so much about how will this use for the single person who's writing a Java program to interact with Iceberg all on its own, because that doesn't really happen that much. So yeah, I think we probably will see different strengths and weaknesses in the different languages that match what they're actually good at.
Yeah, I agree. Jack, any comment on languages?
I feel we are actually naturally arriving at a sweet spot between one approach, which is developing one specific SDK for every single language, and the other extreme is you just have, for example, a Rust implementation, and you have bindings for all the other languages, which is done by quite a few other projects. And right now, I think in Iceberg, it's more there are dedicated projects, but on the other side, when there is a use case for bindings, it will naturally happen as we see in Python, in C++, those are happening in real time. So I think that's actually a good spot for we to keep evolving so that we both can run relatively fast, and at the same time, we don't always duplicate the code because that's kind of a natural instinct for engineers to say we shouldn't duplicate code, but I think reality is that we have to keep the balance. And I was talking with Amog from Databricks, another PMC member, the other day that there has been a thought about creating some sort of certifications for SDK features, and there has been some thoughts going on in the community for quite some time. I think for people interested, it could also be a good chance to pick up that topic and develop that further into some concrete solutions.
Jill?
Yeah. So agree with everything said by the panelists. One of the things that I want to emphasize here is that, so from Cloudera, I would say that we do have a Hive engine and the Impala engine. Hive is, of course, in Java, and Impala is using C++. One of the things that we're trying to address is really ease of use, even in the SQL syntax level, right? So we want to making sure that from Hive implementation and the Impala implementation, the SQL syntax is even compatible. So really providing the out-of-box ease of use. Yeah. So not only from language, but also from SQL syntax perspective.
Got it. So we have pretty exciting times ahead for Iceberg, I mean, different areas. What areas of the project could benefit the most from new contributors to help add momentum to the data evolution and re-evolution? Sung?
I have a few things to say about this topic. Maybe I can talk about the first commit I've made to the Iceberg community as a start. So, yeah, I still very much remember it crystal clear. I think it was maybe 4 years ago when the metadata tables, like the partition tables, they were just introduced. And I had found this bug with the Java code base where if you introduce schema evolution onto the table, then the metadata table, which is a static schema, would try to evolve as well. And it wasn't allowing me to use the awesome metadata table that I wanted to use. So I raised the issue, a very detailed description of the issue, and Zihan and Edward actually jumped on it. And they were like, all right, this is a pretty good issue you found. Put in your first PR. And I really worked through a few days explaining the issue and diving in deep into the code base together with the committers back then, and finally put together my first PR. So, based on that experience, what I would say is bug fixes are a great way to get started. If you're actively using Iceberg and you run into a bug, putting together a feedback in a constructive and well-organized way goes a long way to get all of the committers and PMC members who might be very busy with 100 different tasks to actually get up to speed with the issue you're seeing and help you along the way to make your first contribution. And I would also say, and I'm going to be very biased by saying this, contributing to the language sub-project is a really great way to make your contributions. And that's because we have amazing reference implementations that are in Java that you can actually read through and learn about so that you don't have to reinterpret the spec in a completely new way. And you also get the benefit of being able to contribute in a language that you're comfortable with. So I think it's a, what do they say, like 2 birds in 1 stone, in that you're starting to code in an area you're comfortable with, it's accessible to you, but at the same time, you're creating a big impact by making Iceberg more accessible to a wide range of users.
All right, Ryan, what's your take on what the areas that would be beneficial for Iceberg?
Sorry, what?
What's the, from your standpoint, what's the areas that the contributors can work on and beneficial for the project?
So I always recommend to first-time contributors to choose something that matters to you, because you might not have the same positive experience getting people to put attention on it and review and things like that. And I think often you need to be the one saying, hey guys, take a look at this. It's unfortunate, but I think that really is the way it goes. So having the need really forces you to follow through on it. So I think that it is always good to do something that really matters to you. And also respond quickly. It takes a lot of time to get spun up on what this change is doing and all of the context because it's a really large code base at this point. And so, if it takes 2 weeks to update a PR, then I've got to rebuild all of that context again. But if it's the next day, we can go back and forth very quickly.
Russ?
I don't know, this is a hard question for me. I mean, I definitely agree that if you don't personally have a reason for your change to go in, it's usually very hard to get interested in a project. But I do think there is a class of things where you can get involved that's relatively easy to start and really helps build your knowledge of the project. And I know everyone said this, but the docs. The docs are there, and we have tons of things that you might have seen in a talk or you might have seen someone blog about, but don't actually have detailed instructions on how it works. And actually following through, going into the code, seeing how it works, and writing up documentation is one of the ways that I try to get information about how the project works and make my own contributions. I noted this in the talk I gave today, but while I was doing my research for the transaction isolation talk, I kept walking back through the code because I was checking things to make sure everything worked the way I thought that it did. And in doing that presentation and trying to get that information ready for somebody else, I found several issues where I'm like, uh-oh, we're actually doing something slightly wrong in the edge case here or something like that. And I think that's a really good way to get involved in the project. If you care about it, helping others learn about it, helping other people use it is a really important way to take your first step.
All right. Bill, any comment about?
Well, this is a tough question for me. As a PM, I no longer write the code. But I did check with our engineering team, and the first thing they're telling me is that, hey, being able to, debugging is really the way to engaging with the community is the first thing. And also talking to Winyu, Gabor, and that they're able to contribute to the delete vectors that Ryan was talking about this morning is a kind of very rewarding experience for them as well, because really the collaboration in the community and making the project very strong.
Yeah, nice. Jack?
Yeah, I think I echo strongly about everything has been said. My recommendation always to people who ask me about how should I contribute to Iceberg is to do the thing you care the most about, because that's the thing that you will be the most motivated to push through, even if there's no attention in the beginning. You will always be able to find people to review your PR, review your design, and get things through. And for people who are just looking around, like if you're a college student or if you don't really have any code experience and you want to get started with this, I also echo that documentation and maybe testing or maybe new language implementation are the easy things that you can get started with.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is true for any open source project and Apache project, to be honest.
Oh, just to add one thing, what Jack was saying, documentation, very important, right?
Yeah.
So as an open source project, you can have a wonderful implementation, but without documentation, proper documentation, nobody will understand. So that is very important. So become a contributor. I believe that if you write extensive documentation, you can also be the contributor and the committer for the community.
Yeah, it makes sense. We are almost at time. Just wanted to give last words to you guys. So Jack, do you mind to start? I mean, just express whatever you want about Iceberg and the community there.
Yeah, I think Iceberg has really evolved from a table format into, in my mind, many different formats and specs that are all very influential to the development of the data infrastructure space. And with so many people here, I'm really optimistic and I'm very, very excited about the next steps of what we can achieve.
All right, nice. Sung?
Yeah, I think I've been involved in the Iceberg community for about 4 years now. And it's so incredible to see how it has grown to the place where we're now hosting the first ever in-person summit. I think it's important to keep in mind that continuing the conversations, discussing your production use cases for how you're using Iceberg, the missing gaps together as a community is really what's going to help us figure out the next spec changes, the next features we need to include into Iceberg. So if you're interested in chatting afterwards, come say hi. Let's keep the conversation going.
All right. Russell?
Yeah, I think if I have a moment here, I would talk about how the community, I think, will continue to grow. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that everyone is welcome to work with us, to be a part of the project, to be up on this stage, in a year's time, something like that. We need to stay welcome, we need to stay opening, especially as we're in this environment right now. We're all both competing and collaborating to make sure that everyone else you're working with in the community, you remember they're just another person and they're trying to do the things they want to do and they have things that they like. And no one is actively trying to destroy your work or things like that. And it's tough in an open source community. But I'm hoping at events like this, we can kind of really see that we're all just engineers working on technology together. And that makes me really excited to keep working on Iceberg in the future.
All right. Bill?
Well, I want to say Iceberg is more than table format. I think it is a catalyst for modern data architecture because I witnessed firsthand. I started Iceberg at the Cloudera about 4 years ago. I witnessed firsthand how Iceberg actually transforming the data industry at a large scale. So please keep engaging the community, keep contributing, and also learn from each other. This is why we're here in this session today.
All right. Ryan?
I think I just want to say thank you again. Thanks for being here. Thank you for choosing to contribute. This this all requires an open source community, right? This would not be possible if it were, you know, a single company saying, hey, you use this. Like this, open source is the only model that makes this new architecture possible. And that means we need all of you to embrace the community and use the software and extend it. And so thank you for being here, and thanks for contributing.
All right. Thank you, guys. And
Thank you.
that's the closing comment.
Thank you.